WorldBeyondWar.org/Assange, you can see a draft of a letter that we would send as an event, as a conference to Julian Assange. If you have a great passion for editing, please leave the room. No, please, please tell me what I have to change in the letter. Could I please now see a show of hands of people who need a bus to bring them back to this hotel after the rally and the open mic and everything this evening? We've been planning tentatively to have a bus at 8 p.m. to bring people back here who want to come back here. So I'm seeing quite a few hands. I think we will go forward with that plan. Thank you. There are evaluations on every chair. If you haven't already, please fill out an evaluation. You're welcome to wait until the end of the day so you know what you're evaluating. And please stick that in a box on the table in the hallway. If you appreciate the concept of recycling and not wasting, the name tag lanyards and name tag holders that you're wearing, hopefully you're wearing, some of you are, have been used at numerous conferences and will continue to be used at numerous conferences if you stick them in a box on the table in the hallway before you leave. We also are probably at the lunch break, which is the longest break. Our friends from Italy are going to show a 8-minute video on this screen that people will be welcome to watch if they want while they're waiting for lunch to be ready. So we have an excellent panel. We have 2 speakers, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. Our first speaker, who you heard from yesterday, needs pretty much no introduction. Mairead Maguire, apart from being a brilliant peace activist and one of those exceptional, actually deserving Nobel Peace Prize laureates, is the co-founder of Peace People, which you all should support and be involved with. Please welcome Mairead Maguire.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's lovely to be with you all. And I would like to thank David and the organization for an opportunity to speak again. But, you know, there are so many wonderful people here in the audience, all with fabulous stories and great experiences that, please, I know I'm speaking a second time, which I don't feel I should be. I think that people should be given an opportunity, please, to come up and speak and tell your story as much as possible, because it's so important. You have important experiences to share with us, because in my journey I have found I have met the most fascinating people with wonderful words of wisdom to share with me. That's why I love working for peace and being on the journey for peace, because it's just so exciting and thought-provoking that you get things when you listen to people from a completely different perspective. And that's why we must, in a sense, learn to be patient with one another and to be peaceful. And it saddens me that when we see today in the world the peace movement divided all over the place, the people divided all over the place, and getting angry with each other, instead of recognizing each person has a right to their thoughts. Each person has a right, as long as they're not using violence, to share those thoughts, those ideas, those opinions, and we should take them and look at them. So I hope when I read my speech that my ideas, if they challenge you, please know that I love you. Know that I deeply respect you. Know that I know you did it your way. And know that I'm only sharing with you some ideas that maybe there's another way and maybe we can find that way together. So let's unite the peace movement around the world, because this is not about anybody having all the answers. It's not about nationalism, militarism being they're the baddies, we're the goodies. It's about our common humanity. It's about men, women, and children in the world today suffering, and us needing to find ways and alternatives where that suffering will be changed. You know, we look for hope in the world today, and sometimes things happen and it gives us great hope because we say, oh my God, isn't that marvellous? So things that give us hope, I'm sure you all take hope when you see the youth on the move. We're all sitting as adults wondering what the Action for Peace is. And you see young people striking from their schools all over the world and saying, we must do something about the climate. And we must each make a contribution to changing the climate. And we see a beautiful, fresh, young voice, and my God, isn't she lovely? Greta Thunberg. You know, at 16 years of age, she comes out and she says it all. We have to do something about climate change. We have to ask ourselves, is it right to flit all over the world, burning up the atmosphere? We have to do something. She gives us hope. And also we see acts by individuals which give us hope that the courage of individuals and their preparedness to make a sacrifice. So we see the like of Ken Myers and Tarek Koff coming all the way to America to stand here and to challenge the use of military use of Shannon. And my God, what a price they have had to pay. Instead of the Irish welcoming them, instead of the Irish government giving them a Nobel medal, what do? They hold their passports and told them they can't leave Ireland. You know, when I read that, I was so ashamed of how Ireland has treated Ken and Tarek for coming here to remind us in our conscience, should we really be sending warplanes out to destroy other countries? Is that the Irish spirit? Have we lost our soul? Give Tarek and Ken their passports back immediately. I think we need to offer hope to humanity suffering under the scourge of violence, militarism and war. People are tired of armaments and war. People want peace. They've seen that militarism doesn't solve problems, but is a part of the problem. The global climate crisis is added to by the emissions of US military, the greatest polluter in the world. Militarism also creates uncontrollable forms of tribalism and nationalism. They are a dangerous and murderous form of identity about which we need to take steps to transcend, lest we unleash further dreadful violence upon our world. To do this, we need to acknowledge that our common humanity and human dignity is more important than our different traditions. We need to recognize that our life and the lives of others and nature are sacred, and we can solve our problems without killing each other. We need to accept and celebrate diversity and otherness. We need to work to heal the old divisions and misunderstandings, give and accept forgiveness, and choose non-killing and non-violence as well as to solve our problems. We are also challenged to build structures through which we can cooperate and which reflect our interconnected and interdependent relationships. The vision of the European Union founders to link countries together economically, unfortunately, has lost its way. As we are witnessing the growing militarization of Europe, its role as a driving force for armaments, and the dangerous path under the leadership of USA, NATO, towards a new Cold War and military aggression, with the building up of battle groups and the European army. I believe the European countries who used to take initiatives in the UN for peaceful settlements of conflicts, particularly allegedly peaceful countries like Norway and Sweden, are now one of the US, NATO's most important war assets. The EU is a threat to the survival of neutrality and has been drawn into being complicit in breaking international law through so many illegal and immoral wars since 9/11. I therefore believe NATO should be abolished and the myth of military security replaced by human security through international law and the implementation of peace architecture. The science of peace and the implementation of non-killing, non-violent political science will help us transcend violent thinking and replace a culture of violence with a culture of non-killing, non-violence in our homes, in our societies, and in our world. Also, the UN should be reformed and should actively take up their mandate to save the world from the scourge of war. People and governments should be encouraged to evoke moral and ethical standards in our own personal lives and in public standards. Also, we have abolished slavery, piracy. So too, we can abolish militarism and war in our world. I believe if we are to survive as the human family, we must end militarism. We must end militarism and war and have a policy of general and complete disarmament. In order to do so, we have to look at what is sold to us as the driving forces of militarism and war. Who are the real beneficiaries of war? So we begin to be sold the wars are for democracy, the fight against terrorism, but history has taught us wars preceded the fight against terrorism. Greed and colonialism, the seizing of resources preceded terrorism, and the fight for so-called democracy preceded terrorism by thousands of years. We now live in an age of Western colonialism, disguised as a fight for freedom, civil rights, religious wars, the right to protect. Under the premises, we are sold the opinion that by sending our troops there and facilitating this, we are bringing democracy, rights for women, education. And for the more slightly astute of us, for those of us who see through this war propaganda, we are told that this benefits our countries. Excuse me. Irish champagne. It's beautiful. For those of us who are slightly more realistic about our country's goals in these countries, we see an economic benefit for our countries for cheap oil, tax revenues from companies' expansion into these countries through mining, oil, resources in general, and sales arms. So at this point, we are questioned morally for the good of our own country and for our own morals. The majority of us do not own shares in Shell, BP, Raytheon, Halliburton, shares that skyrocketed, including Raytheon, threefold since the Syrian proxy war began. The majority of us, the majority of us know that the major US military firms are Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE Systems, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Airbus, Thales. The general public do not benefit from the massive tax expenditure incurred by these wars. In the end, these benefits are funneled towards the top. Shareholders benefit, and the top 1% who run our media and the military, industrial, political complex will be the beneficiaries of war. So we find ourselves in a world of endless wars as large arms companies and the people who benefit the most have no financial incentives for peace in these countries. Wars suit them. People benefit from wars. The rich benefit from wars, and the poor pay the price in poverty and starvation. Irish neutrality. I would first like to address all Americans and thank the young soldiers and all Americans and give them my deepest condolences, as I am truly sorry so many soldiers and civilians have been injured or killed by these unnecessary USA-NATO wars. It is with great regret that the American people have paid a high price, as has the Iraqis, Syrians, Libyans, Afghans, Somalis, but we must call it for what it is. America is a colonial power, much like the British Empire. They may not plant their flag or change the currency, but when you have 800 American bases in over 80 countries, and you can dictate what currency someone sells their oil in, and when you use the economic and financial banking system to cripple countries, and you push which leaders you wish to control a country, such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and now Venezuela, I feel it is Western imperialism with a modern twist. In Ireland, we suffered colonialism for over 800 years. Ironically, it was the American Irish that put pressure on the British Empire to give the Republic of Ireland its freedom. So as Irish people today must question our own morals and look to the future and wonder, how will our children judge us? Were we the people who facilitated the mass movement of weapons, political prisoners, civilians through Shannon Airport to facilitate imperial powers to slaughter the people in far-off lands, and for what end? So that Google, Facebook, Microsoft will continue to provide jobs in Ireland, and most of them not pay taxes? How much blood of women and children has been spilt overseas? How many countries have we, by facilitating the USA-NATO forces going through Shannon Airport, helped to destroy? So I ask the people of Ireland, how does this sit with you? I have visited Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and Syria, and seen the devastation and the destruction caused by the military intervention in these countries. I believe it is time to abolish militarism and solve our problems through international law, mediation, dialogue, and negotiation. As an alleged neutral country, it is important that the Irish government ensures that Shannon Airport is used for civilian purposes and not used to facilitate US military occupations, invasions, renditions, and war purposes. The Irish people strongly support neutrality, but this is being negated by the use of Shannon Airport by the US military. Ireland and the Irish people, much loved and respected around the world, and seen as a country that has contributed much to the development of many countries, particularly through education, healthcare, arts, and music. However, that history is endangered by the government's accommodating the US military in Shannon Airport, also by its participation in NATO-led forces such as the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. Ireland's neutrality places it in an important position, and arising out of the experience in peacemaking and conflict resolution in Northern Ireland, where I come from, and at home, it could be a mediator in general and complete disarmament and conflict resolution in other countries caught up in the tragedy of violence and war. It also has an important role in the upholding of the Good Friday Agreement and helping with the restoration of the Stormont Parliament in Northern Ireland, because we in Northern Ireland must restore our Parliament, must build the trust and the friendship in Northern Ireland and solve our ethnic, political conflict in the north of Ireland and take down our walls in Belfast. I'm very hopeful for the future, and I believe if we reject militarism in its entirety as the aberration and dysfunction in human history, and all of us, no matter what area of change we work in, can unite and agree we want a demilitarized, unarmed world. We can do this together if we unite our voices together, no matter what area of work we live in. If the vision becomes a demilitarized world, we can do this, and we will be a serious threat to those who believe that the future is a highly militarized, divided world. Our vision is different, and our vision can work only when we unite each other. Let us remember, in human history, people abolished slavery, piracy, and we can abolish militarism, war, and relegate these barbaric ways to the dustbin of history. And women can play an important role. This is about nurturing and looking after and looking out for all the children, all the men, all the women, all the children in the world. Women play a great role here in compassion and building peace and love. And you can't stop love. We never asked, does love exist? We all know love exists. It's the power of love, isn't it? In this very room, we all know what love is. And when people say to me, peace isn't possible, I say, is love possible? Of course it is. It's part of human nature. So is peace. And finally, let us look to the heroes of our times, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, to mention just a few. Julian Assange is currently being persecuted by the British authorities over his role as a publisher and an author. Julian's groundbreaking journalism exposes government crimes during the Iraqi and the Afghan war. He has saved many lives, but cost him his own freedom and perhaps his own life. He has been physically and psychologically tortured in a British prison and threatened with extradition to the USA to face a grand jury, simply by doing his job as a journalist, exposing the truth. Let us all do what we can to work for his freedom and demand he will not be extradited to the United States of America. Please ask yourself, what can I do to help Julian and thereby helping all journalists in the world and giving them the knowledge they can write what they want to write and their lives will be protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is known to most of you. Dave Webb, I'm not sure how, manages to be many, many things. He's a former board member of World Beyond War. He's the chair of the UK CND, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, the vice president of the International Peace Bureau, the convener of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, and many other things. Please welcome Dave Webb.
Thank you very much. I'm going to show a PowerPoint in a minute, but thank you very much. It's great to be here in wonderful Ireland. I'm sorry for all the stuff that we've done in the past, us Brits, but I wasn't around then. Well, I was around for some of it, but not. Anyway, I apologize for everything. And there's a lot to apologize for, of course. It's been a great conference. Yesterday was really good, really inspiring, and there were some really excellent speakers and some excellent things were coming across. I think this session is more about activism, so I want to say a few things about activism, and in particular on the particular campaign that I'm involved in, which David mentioned, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, because the militarization of space is something that we need to be aware of. And so I want to just highlight what that's about. It was just before I do that, just to say that Mairead said yesterday about not forgetting all of the various people, the whistleblowers and so on, like Mordecai Vanunu. And it's true, we mustn't forget about him. And I just wanted to say that the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, their office in London, is actually called Mordecai Vanunu House, in remembrance of the fantastic kind of sacrifice that he's made in order to bring to light the issue of nuclear weapons in Israel. Also, regarding the links between the various campaigns, which I think are growing now, especially between climate change and militarism, because the links are pretty obvious. The military contributes a huge amount to global warming in the production and not only the production of the weapon systems that are going on off the line all the time, but also the amount of fuel that they burn up in exercises and so on. And on Monday, there's the start of I think it's a weeks-long action in London to try to blockade as much of London as possible by Extinction Rebellion. And they're doing this by blocking it into different kind of groups. So Monday will be Extinction Rebellion Peace. So there is a definite link between the peace movement and the climate change movement. And that's, I think, growing. We're collaborating more and more. And I think that's a great thing. Also, just to say, it was great to hear yesterday about the New Zealand arms fairs being basically closed. That's great. And the arms fairs, of course, are the places where the people sell their wares. They sell these things. They're horrendous weapons to anybody who'll buy them. And we have a big one in London too, the DICE. I forget what DICE stands for, DSEI. It stands for something to do with selling arms. Anyway, there are these huge arms fairs that happen every 2 years. And there is a growing presence there as well to blockade before the exhibits get into the arms fair. And there was a really good week of action about that. A number of people, different groups on different days turned up to join the blockade. So again, people are starting to take more and more action, I think, and starting to raise awareness of the things that are causing the big problems with us today. I was also inspired by John Maguire yesterday and what he was saying, and one of the phrases he used was, we're here from World Beyond War, but war is now being approached beyond our world, and this is what I wanted to talk about, the weaponization, militarization of space. And I don't know if we could show the slideshow. Yesterday was the first day, in fact, of Keep Space for Peace Week. Many of you know that? Some of you were aware of that? Yeah, cool. Okay, so that's the introductory slide. The next one. So this is the poster that we've been using to advertise Keep Space for Peace Week. And I also wanted, I'm sorry, I'm going to be really awkward and ask if we can go back to the video on YouTube. There's a little YouTube video, there's the link, which gives us, if you can, yeah, I think it's on YouTube. It's a little short film, 4 minutes, about the campaign in Britain, in particular around Fylingdales.
Attention. Attention. The UK is currently under attack from a nuclear weapon. You have approximately 4 minutes to find shelter. Communications have been severely disrupted.
This is not a drill. This is Yorkshire, God's own country, and it is on the front line of any potential nuclear conflict.
Hey, heck!
In this land of sheep, hills, moors, steam trains and more sheep, we now have a singularly space-age skyline. RAF Fylingdales.
Hang about, that doesn't sound right. RAF? No runway, no planes, no pilots.
The land is owned by the Ministry of Defence, but everything on it is owned by the United States Defence Department. This World War I and II military firing range was made into a key NATO listening post during the Cold War, and it was designed to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles.
You mean nuclear weapons?
Yes, and it would give a 4-minute warning of a nuclear attack.
We can't even sup a pint in 4 minutes.
Fylingdales would be responsible for targeting a retaliatory nuclear strike.
Hang about, isn't Fylingdales all about tracking space debris?
Tracking man-made space debris, like old satellites, is one of the functions of Fylingdales, but its key strategic role is as part of the United States missile defence. For years now, the United States has been developing an extremely expensive and dubiously effective global weapons system, generally termed missile defence, but often known, especially in its early days, as Star Wars. Yes, Chewie, we're angry at that too. This system isn't a defence, but is offensive. It's the shield that complements a US-led nuclear sword. It allows for the capability to make first strike attacks without fear of retaliation. And it has sparked a renewed arms race as others seek to develop weapons capable of penetrating this shield. It helps the US achieve what they call full spectrum dominance, control of land, sea, air and space.
So the Americans could fire a nuclear missile without any comeback? That's mad.
No, it's not mad. And that's actually a problem. Mad, or mutually assured destruction, however flawed it was, meant that it would be suicidal to fire a nuclear weapon, as the other side would immediately fire back and everyone and everything is destroyed. If one side has a shield and can therefore fire with impunity, This makes the use of nuclear weapons more likely.
So what ought to be done about it? Here, take me pint.
1967, at the height of the push to get a man on the moon. There was excitement about space being explored for the benefit of all, but many recognised the potential for the space race to lead to a disastrous military conflict. Hence, the Outer Space Treaty was negotiated, stating that the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, and shall be the province of all mankind. The US Star Wars programme began the process of tearing up this treaty, backed by a compliant UK, who gave them this patch of the Yorkshire countryside. Now, things are even worse. The UK government is helping Trump realise his dark imperial vision to create a new branch of the US military, known as Space Command or Space Force. As the world marked the 50th anniversary of the moon landings, the UK was busy tarring the legacy of what could have remained a giant leap for mankind. They outlined a £30 million space programme, working alongside the US Department of Defence, adding space as a warfighting domain. So, that hope that we had 50 years ago, that the exploration of space should be for the peaceful benefit of all humanity, is being destroyed. And this monstrous carbuncle on the face of our much-loved North Yorkshire moors is actually a part of that.
Thank you very much. So that was the first public showing of that little film, and it's just one of the actions that are going on this week. There's about 40 different actions around the world in something like 10 or 11 different countries, and also a big conference going on in India, which is jointly organised by a university there and the Global Network, about space law. Basically, what can we do to try to prevent the militarization and of space, the further militarization, the weaponization of space through international law. At the moment, there's one international law regarding the use of space. That's the Outer Space Treaty. Well, when I say the use of space, I mean to try to preserve space for humanity, as was mentioned earlier on in that little clip. The Outer Space Treaty, which was signed, came into force, I think, in 1967, around that time, and has most of the countries of the world have signed up to it. But all that Outer Space Treaty says, apart from the fine words it has, and they are fine words, it just prevents the stationing of weapons of mass destruction in space. It doesn't stop weapons as such being put into space, and it doesn't stop the transmission or the journey of nuclear weapons through space to wherever their targets might be. So we need more space laws, but they're not very forthcoming because the major space-faring countries, in particular the US, of course, don't see anything wrong with the current situation because their situation is they feel they dominate the region, and that's good enough for them. Also, of course, space is considered really to be infinite. So when you think about how every kind of space on Earth is being taken up by something military, just think of the corporations, how that little glint in the corporation's eye when they say an infinite space they can fill up with weapons. That's kind of, well, terrifying, really. So that little clip mentioned about the space race, which you will probably remember, and we had a lot of information and documentaries about the moon landing just recently. Well, it started with, well, where did it start? It started basically in the modern era with the V2 rockets in Germany, Nazi Germany firing V2s into Europe, into London and other places in Europe. And the person who put that program together, Werner von Braun, at the end of the Second World War, the US smuggled him and 100 or so other scientists that were working on that particular project back to the United States to continue their work for the United States. And the Saturn V rocket that lifted the Apollo 11 astronauts to the moon was actually his work. It was basically derived from the V2 rocket. So right at the beginning, you know, the space business has not got a very kind of auspicious beginning. And it's carried on from there, really. So now, in just a few decades, outer space has become one of the most important places for global, commercial, political, and military interests. And the military depends heavily on space-based components for communications, for, in fact, I think it's on the next slide. That's okay, I've got the clicker here, it's okay. So our concern then is the misuse of outer space, and in particular, the militarization of space. And this little kind of few words there, the United States, US Space Command dominating the space dimension of military operations to protect US interests and investment, integrating space forces into warfighting capabilities and full spectrum of conflict. This was from a publication by the US Space Command in 1997. It was called Vision for 2020. And 2020 is next year. So their vision was for full spectrum dominance, as they called it. Dominance over land, sea, air, space, and information, interestingly enough. And that's fully underway now. So this was the US Space Command's vision for 2020. It describes the idea of full spectrum dominance and went on to look at various ways in which that might be achieved. So now the Earth is surrounded by hundreds of satellites, and many of them are run by or for the military, which uses them for all kinds of purposes, for surveillance, for communication, for global positioning, targeting missiles, drone operations, missile defense systems, and many more. Some of these pictures, I think, will probably be taken from satellites. In the preparation of every war, satellites will be used to take photographs of the places where the military will want to have to gain access or want to bomb or want to do something horrendous. So it's a really important place. And just to give an idea, I want to give an idea of the kind of thing that we're faced with, really, but then also at the end, the kinds of responses, the citizens' response to these things. So there are there's a global kind of array of ground-based stations which have been established for tracking satellites and other space objects, because the military wants to know what other countries' satellites are doing so that they can keep an eye on them too. So there's a global network of those. There's also electronic spying, information, hacking, interception, a number of spy bases around the world. There's one also near where I live. Fylingdales is near where I live in England. The picture on the bottom right there is of Menwith Hill, which many of you may have heard of, a huge NSA spy base which basically taps into every form of electronic communication that goes through the UK. There's others there, Waihope in New Zealand, there's Pine Gap in Australia, there's one in Sweden, somewhere there, and Croughton in Britain, another intelligence gathering, but also communication system. So yet another global network of these spy bases for hacking and interception. And of course, cyber warfare is becoming more and more important, more and more part of that. More and more a threat to our existence, because if you can hack into a nuclear weapon system, then you can do all kinds of horrendous things. Satellite communication networks have been set up for the command and control of everything that the military has everywhere at any time on the planet, down from huge battle groups down to the individual soldiers who will have communication systems through satellites. And there's one in particular called the Multiple User Operation System, MUOS, which gives coverage right up to in the very far north. So it's of importance for the military working in the Arctic regions, for example. There's also missile defense systems which deny retaliation, enable a first strike, as was mentioned. Not only is there the missile defense system to try to, it's said to basically defend the United States, but also particular battle areas. So there's mobile missile defense systems which are scattered around. There's some in Asia, in South Korea, in Japan, owned by the US, and also, of course, now the ground-based systems in Poland and in Romania, right on the border with Russia, threatening them. They're also used for drone communication and for piloting drones and for firing deadly missiles in battle areas. Then the latest kind of developments in this kind of arms race is hypersonic missiles. These are things that travel many times the speed of sound, and they can be used then because they're extremely difficult to defend against. You can't very easily see them, you can't very easily track them, you can't very easily intercept them. So these are being developed now, first of all in the United States, but also now by China, by Russia, and various other countries. Because if we can't stop one country from doing it, other countries will join in. And the idea behind those as well was to produce this idea of prompt global strike. That is, the ability for the military to be able to strike anywhere on Earth within 30 minutes. There are also secret projects going on, unmanned space planes, to replace things like the space shuttle, only for the military. There are a number of space shuttle missions that were also purely military ones, and now the military is developing its own kind of space plane, which can be used coming in and out of orbit as needed. And there's new space weapons projects are underway under Donald Trump. Many projects were initiated in the beginning under Ronald Reagan. You remember his Star Wars plan, his idea of Star Wars. The heavens would be full of weapon systems. Many of those proved to be ridiculous. You couldn't do it. There was no physical way in which you could produce the technology to provide space-based lasers and things like that. But those ideas have been rejuvenated. Even though some of the projects were cancelled, some of the work was still going on in laboratories around the United States. And now those ideas have been resurrected and resold to Donald Trump. And the problem is the arms sellers, the arms producers, the people who develop these things, the corporations, they sell, when they sell their systems to the politicians, they sell an idea, they sell a dream, they sell a vision. They don't sell an actual product because it hasn't been developed yet. They say, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could build a shield to protect America from any kind of nuclear attack? Wouldn't it be good if we could put a laser up in space that could shoot down any missile that was coming into the United States, or shoot down any particular target on Earth that we wanted? And of course, they haven't developed those systems yet. Okay, I've got to finish. So, in fact, I haven't got very many things to say. Just the big question is, how do we keep space for peace? And there are various pathways through various treaties that could be brought together. There are steps that we could take towards keeping space in peace, and all of those different pathways, all of those different kind of points on the way would help. But we haven't got very far so far. Progress has been very slow. So I just want to quickly go on to show some of we won't go into that, but there are, sorry, just go through this. So every year since the year 2000, the UN has designated this week as World Space Week to celebrate the contributions of space science and technology to the betterment of the human condition. And we've called for similar things to happen during that week, only with a focus on keeping space for peace. And these have been some of the posters we've produced in the past few years, to help with that campaign, to bring people together, to make them realize the dangers of what's happening and try to get them to do something. Perhaps in their local communities, there's nearly always something nearby which contributes to the militarization of space. So there is a resistance that's building, and there's a resistance to missile defense systems in South Korea. There have been huge protests about this missile defense systems that's being imposed upon them there. Also in Bath, Maine, where the ship-based missile defense systems are constructed, and where Bruce Gagnon comes from, who's the convener. No, I'm the convener. He's the coordinator of the global network. He does all the work, basically. I just talk about it. So he lives there and has built a fantastic campaign against the Bath Ironworks. Then the radars in Okinawa, there's a big campaign there to prevent the radars in the Czech Republic. There was that prevented that being established in the Czech Republic at one time. Fylingdales we just saw, and in Turkey too there's even protest about the radar that's being used by the US there, and NATO. To MUOS, that system I mentioned earlier in Sicily, big protests, huge protests against that. Sicily is a small little island, you know, there's not a huge population, but the majority of people didn't want the thing there. And also to the manufacturers, of course. So in Berkeley, in Maryland, in North Andover, and so on, protesting about the actions of some of these corporations. And also drones, of course, that's one of the big things in US, Germany, UK, and in Pakistan. So, and also against the command centers. So in Colorado Springs, in Omaha, Nebraska, where Stratcom is going. Okay, I'm finishing now, sorry. And satellite centers, okay. So the protest is there, and it's growing. And we want to bring this together. Part of the global network is to support those individual groups in their communities and bring them together with the wider global system. So I hope you don't ask you to particularly change whatever you're protesting about, whatever you're working on. Just bring in the dimension of space so that people can actually appreciate what's actually happening and question it themselves. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Test. So we got a bunch of questions here and not a whole lot of time to get through them. I'll try to address one to each of our two speakers in turn and see if we can give fairly concise answers, and maybe we can get through all of them. So starting with Dave, all countries are dependent on space and satellites for commerce and healthcare and communications. Is there a way to protect satellites without militarization?
Yeah, you have treaties that say you won't attack satellites. There is no real way to protect a satellite. You can't harden it, you can't build a wall around it, you can't put stuff up there to help protect it, because it makes them too big. So really you just need understanding, you need cooperation from the international community and treaties to say that you won't attack other people's satellites. Some people have already said that unilaterally, but we need a global system.
Excellent. Mairead, this conference has been very informative and inspiring. I also feel that no one seems to have the answer to how to break through the constant glorification of war and militarism in the United States. Even at the local level, I don't know how to stop it. The celebrations of soldiers and raising of flags outside this hotel, I would note there's a U.S. flag for some reason, creates a consistent force that makes cultural change very difficult. How can we at the local level interrupt this?
I think we have to work at all levels. We start in the home by teaching peace. We start in the communities by challenging militarism, and we start at a wider area. If the universities took seriously non-violent policies as a serious science. I mean, it's not even recognised in universities that non-violence works. It's a serious science. So we've been bringing out teachers of non-violence, non-killing, peace. And I think peace is a science. We have to learn the steps, like any science, and be taught how to make it. But essentially, peace starts on a one-to-one basis. It starts with a smile. It starts with us humanising each other and refusing to demonise each other, and seeing when our governments are demonising other countries in order to prepare and attack them, challenge that demonisation. Travel where you can and bring the story of where you travel to back home into your classrooms. So there's so many ways to make peace beyond the imagination. So I think we break through the culture of violence and war by building this culture of friendship and reaching out to each other. So it is doable.
Well said. To Dave, I'll give you two that seem to be related to me. One says, discuss chemtrails and climate change and manipulation. One says, what do you think about military geoengineering Earth as weapon, like producing earthquake, tsunamis, storms?
Okay. This is controversial ground here. There is a concern about chemtrails. I'm not sure about it myself, but I haven't seen the extent of the You know what chemtrails are? These are the trails that are left in the sky. People are concerned that they may be raining something down on the population. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't really know enough about that. I know it does concern a lot of people, and their concerns should be addressed one way or the other. That's the main thing. What was the other thing? Oh, it was about geoengineering. No, geoengineering is a bad thing. Don't start trying to fiddle around with the planet in order to counter some of the things that we've done to it. We should stop doing the things that we're doing in order to let it recover naturally. But as soon as you start to try and use techniques to try to overcome the techniques that we put in there to cause the problem in the first place, you cause other problems. And that's not the way to do it. We just need to be more respectful for the planet and for ourselves.
That's right. Mairead, I'll try to give you two that may be somewhat related. I interject my personal view. I think the only propaganda problem with Greta Thunberg is that they would never allow a kid on TV to speak against war. On the other hand, every event you go to, you get these questions about dark forces behind Greta Thunberg. So here's one. War criminal and drone murderer Obama had a meeting with Greta Thunberg. What does this say to you in respect of being controlled together with the climate movement? And the other one, full spectrum dominance over information. Our voice are only heard widely on media from Telesur, Iran, Russia, and China. Should we see those as partners even in the face of all problems?
You know, I think we must never miss an opportunity to speak to each other and to listen to the other point of view. And the fact that Greta met with everyone and speaks to the politicians at the top, we have to listen to each other and take on board where the truth is in it. Now, with regard to the countries, I remember being in Russia about 50 years ago and speaking to young people in Moscow and Leningrad and Kiev. And way back then they were saying, America's going to attack us and our country has to build up its weapons because America is going to bomb us. And you know, we went to America and we talked to the Americans and they were all saying, oh, communism, communism. The Russians could hardly get the lights on in some of their hotels 50 odd years ago. The people were spending money on militarism, which they should have been spending on their own people. So we've got to stop this demonization of each other. And I've been to Iran with the Iranian peace activists just a couple of years ago. The most beautiful country, where we went on up and down Iran collecting money to buy toys, to fly into Damascus, to go up and down Syria, to see people there being attacked and homeless, to help each other. They should stop this demonization of Iran. They should lift these economic sanctions which are damaging the people of Iran. We have to humanize each other. We have to help each other, and we have to lift policies which are destroying human life. 1.5 million children under the age of 5 destroyed during the Iraqi war. I was in Iraq and seen the horror of children dying because they didn't have basic amenities put on by the West to punish the Iraqi people. We have to stop this. North Korea, we went to North Korea with 30 women, and we went from China into North Korea, walked across the border, North-South Korea, thousands and thousands of women from both those North and South Korea, crying out for a peace treaty. North Korea wants peace. It does not want bombed. So let us take seriously where we find people working for peace and support them in solidarity and demand our governments have peace treaties, not bombs. It's time for this nonsense to stop, and we have to make our voices heard. The problem with the peace movement is we don't believe enough in ourselves. We're afraid to say, stop this nonsense. We think the politicians know. We think the presidents know. We think the scientists know. Well, when you know it's wrong to drop bombs on kids and governments to pick out other countries, put on economic sanctions and try to destroy them and demonize their leaders and kill them and replace them because they don't do their bidding. It's time the peace movement stood up and said what it feels, or we're going to leave it to the destroyers and the militants.
Well said. So I've got 2 questions here that are very Shannon and Limerick specific, and I'm going to pass them to the moderator of a panel later this morning that's on that topic that I think we're going to get the best answers also because we're out of time. But I do have 2 more questions for Dave that I'll do together despite the fact that we're over time. Rocket Lab, a company in New Zealand registered in U.S., started by Kiwi Peter Beck, is lauded as absolutely wonderful, huge public support used by the U.S. military to test payloads. How to combat this public support and get some balance on situation? Second one, pretty general here. What shall we do to protect the peace movement from being controlled by the U.S. empire?
Wow. Okay.
In 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, in 30 seconds. Okay. Well, just if I can come back a little bit to another thing that John Maguire said yesterday about how the military captures that thrill you have of something. So as a kid, you grow up and see space and you're overawed by the wonders of space. And the military have been very clever at capturing that thrill and putting it into something nasty. Okay, so I know we've spoken to a lot of the officers at Fylingdales who are actually really keen on space. They love space, and they're there because that's as close as they could get to it. But they are in the military, and they're doing military stuff. And I'm not really answering the question. I'm saying something I wanted to say. But I think it is difficult. It's to get that thrill without the military slant. I mean, we need the thrill. That's exciting. That's wonderful. But let's just make sure that we understand that the military are moving in there. They're taking advantage of that human kind of excitement that we have and making it into something bad. So we just have to make sure we recognize that, question everything that you think might be dubious. Just keep questioning it, because there is a dual use of space. Space can be used for good. It can be used to monitor the environment, to help with agriculture and so on, but it can also be used for really bad stuff too.
And if you want a thrill, right, get out there with Extinction Rebellion on Peace Day, and I guarantee it will be far more thrilling than sitting in some office working on space weapons. Can we thank these two wonderful speakers?